There was a man who spent almost 30 years of his life failing, poor, drunk most days, working jobs he hated. By 50, he had nothing that looked like success, no stability, no recognition, nothing to point to. But somewhere in the middle of that mess, he kept doing one thing. He wrote, not because he believed it would work out. He had no proof that it would. He simply could not stop. At 50, a small publisher finally noticed him. Charles Bukowski went on to write over 1,000 poems, several novels. He became one of the most widely read writers of his generation. When he died, his gravestone was carved with two words: don't try, not don't bother, not give up. Something closer to this: stop performing the chase. Stop forcing yourself toward outcomes you cannot control. And start paying attention to what you actually cannot stop caring about, even when nobody is rewarding you for it. That one idea carved into a gravestone is the seed of everything Mark Manson is about to explain. Welcome to Bookmark, where we explain the most valuable books in the simplest way possible. Whether you are commuting, working out, or just going about your day, just press play, and we make sure the knowledge finds you, not the other way around. Today we are covering The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck by Mark Manson. Start with what the title does not mean. Most people get this wrong before they even open the book. This is not a book about apathy. It is not telling you to stop caring, check out, or go numb to the world around you. Manson opens with Bukowski for a reason. Bukowski did not succeed by chasing success. He succeeded by refusing to care about anything except the one thing that actually mattered to him. And he kept doing that through decades of proof that it was not working. So the real subject of this book is not indifference. It is selection. Learning what actually deserves your limited attention and having the discipline to stop spending it everywhere else. His argument is that most people never make this choice on purpose. They inherit it from advertising, from family, from whatever culture happened to raise them, and they spend their whole lives fighting for things they never actually chose to care about in the first place. To understand why that choice is so hard to make, Manson starts with a trap almost everyone falls into without noticing. Notice something strange about how a mind works. You feel anxious, and a second later, you become anxious about being anxious. You feel low, and almost right away, you start feeling guilty for feeling low because you know your life is fine, and the fact that you still feel bad makes you feel even worse. Manson calls this the feedback loop from hell. One bad feeling triggers judgment of that feeling, and the judgment creates a second, often worse feeling, stacked right on top of the first. The original feeling was manageable. It is the commentary on top of it that spirals. He traces this back to one cultural message. Somewhere along the way, people were taught that feeling good is the normal state, and that anything else is a problem that needs fixing right away. So a whole industry grew around promising to close that gap. More positivity, more gratitude, more self-improvement. Each one quietly telling you that who you are right now is not quite enough yet. And this is where Manson pushes back hard. The more directly you chase the feeling of happiness, the more aware you become of not having it. Trying hard to feel good becomes itself a constant reminder of how far you are from feeling good. To make this land, Manson invents a character. He calls her the Disappointment Panda, an imaginary superhero. Her power is not saving people. It is telling them the truth they have been avoiding, no matter how uncomfortable that truth is. Every other hero promises you can have anything if you just believe hard enough. The Disappointment Panda tells you something less exciting and far more useful. Some things are going to hurt no matter what you do, and that is fine. It does not mean your life is broken. This leads Manson to an idea he calls the backwards law. Wanting a positive experience is itself a negative experience, because wanting it reminds you that you do not have it yet. Accepting a negative experience strangely becomes a positive one, because the moment you stop fighting it, the suffering around it tends to ease. Security works the same backwards way. The more you chase certainty about your future, your relationships, your career, the more fragile and anxious you tend to feel, because every small doubt starts to feel like a threat. He is not saying you should stop wanting things. He is saying the wanting done in this desperate, direct way is what keeps producing the exact discomfort you are trying to escape. So the goal was never to chase happiness directly. It was to get comfortable with discomfort. Because discomfort is where anything worth having actually gets built. But before that idea becomes useful, Manson has to knock down something almost everyone carries into adulthood without ever questioning it. Somewhere in the last few decades, an entire generation was raised on one repeated message. You are special. You are gifted. You are destined for something extraordinary. Manson does not doubt that the message came from good intentions. He doubts what it produced. He describes two very different reactions to a life that turns out, like most lives do, to be fairly ordinary. The first is what he calls entitlement through victimhood. Life did not deliver the specialness that was promised, so someone else must be to blame. The world is unfair. Other people are the obstacle, and every disappointment becomes more proof of it. The second is entitlement through superiority. Instead of blaming the world, this person simply decides the normal rules do not apply to them. They are above the standards everyone else has to meet because they were always told they were exceptional. The point he is making is that both of these are the same problem, wearing different masks. Both are ways of avoiding one plain fact. Almost everyone, statistically, is going to be average at almost everything. Not as a failure, as simple math. Someone has to sit in the middle of every distribution. And the odds say it is probably you in most areas, most of the time. And once that lands, something loosens. If being remarkable was never guaranteed, then an ordinary life is not proof that something went wrong. It is simply what most human lives actually are, underneath the version people show in public. The energy that was going into defending an exceptional self-image becomes free for something else entirely. Which raises the obvious next question. If you give up chasing specialness, what exactly are you supposed to do with all that freed up energy instead? Manson answers that question with a story about a musician named Dave Mustaine. Mustaine was an original member of the band that became Metallica. He was kicked out before they ever recorded an album. Metallica went on to become one of the biggest metal bands in history. Mustaine formed his own band, Megadeth. It sold over 25 million records worldwide, one of the most successful acts in the genre. And in an interview years later, Mustaine called himself, in his own words, a failure. Because no matter how successful Megadeth became, it was never as successful as the band that had rejected him. Look at that closely. 25 million records is not failure by any reasonable measure, but Mustaine had picked the wrong measuring stick. And against that measuring stick, nothing he achieved could ever feel like enough. This is Manson's real argument about suffering. You are always going to be suffering about something. That part is not optional, no matter how successful or comfortable your life becomes. What is optional is what you choose to suffer about. So the real question is not what do you want? Everyone wants to be successful, admired, secure. Those answers barely mean anything because everyone gives the same one. The better question is this: what pain are you willing to carry to get there? What struggle are you actually willing to sit with on the days it stops being exciting? The person who wants to be fit but will not tolerate the discomfort of training does not really want to be fit. They want the idea of it. The same test applies to a relationship, a career, or anything else worth having. If you are not willing to suffer for it, you do not actually want it. You want to have wanted it. Manson pushes this one step further. He splits values into two kinds. Good values are things you can actually control. They tend to help the people around you. And they are grounded in something real, not in a story you have told yourself. Honesty is a good value under this test. It is within your control today. And practicing it tends to strengthen your relationships, not damage them. Bad values fail that test one way or another. Being famous depends almost entirely on luck, timing, and other people's opinions, none of which you control. Being right at all costs tends to hurt the people around you, the more successfully you chase it. A value built on something you cannot control, or something that only benefits you at someone else's expense, will produce suffering as a built-in feature, not as an occasional accident. So the values you choose, the specific things you decide are worth fighting for, are the single biggest factor separating a life that feels meaningful from one that does not. And that choice, Manson argues next, belongs entirely to you, whether or not you ever asked for it. There is a distinction Manson draws that changes how the rest of the book reads. The difference between fault and responsibility. Fault is about who caused something. Responsibility is about who has to deal with it now. These sound similar, they are not the same question. And mixing them up is one of the most common ways people stay stuck for years. Something painful happens to you that you did not choose and could not control. That is not your fault. He is direct about this. He is not telling anyone their pain was deserved or made up. But what happens after that moment is a different question entirely. How you understand it, what you build from it, who you decide to become in response. That part is yours whether you want it to be or not. Nobody else can hand you that decision. And waiting for the person who hurt you to also be the one who fixes it usually means waiting forever because those two people are rarely the same person. This is not a comfortable idea, and Manson does not pretend it is. Taking responsibility for something that was never your fault feels unfair, because in a real sense, it is unfair. But the alternative keeps the power sitting in someone else's hands indefinitely. Every day spent waiting for an apology or a correction is a day spent handing the steering wheel to whoever caused the damage in the first place. This connects to a bigger question about free will. He does not try to settle the philosophy debate about whether choice is truly free. His argument is more practical than that. Whether or not free will exists in some ultimate sense, acting as though your choices matter tends to produce a life that works. Acting as though nothing you do matters because it was all decided in advance tends to produce a life that does not. Between those two ways of living, only one is actually useful. There is a quieter version of this same trap, one that shows up even when nothing painful has happened at all. It has to do with how tightly people hold on to what they already believe. You're wrong about everything. Manson makes an uncomfortable claim here. You are probably wrong about a good chunk of what you currently believe. Not because you are careless, because every belief you hold was built with incomplete information, filtered through whatever you happen to experience at one specific point in a life that keeps moving. The natural response to that is defensiveness, and Manson explains exactly why. The more a piece of information threatens to expose a flaw in how you see yourself, the harder you work to avoid it, dismiss it, or argue against it. He calls this the law of avoidance. The topics that make you most defensive are usually not by accident, the ones most worth looking at honestly. The intensity of the defensiveness is itself a clue about how much is actually at stake underneath it. Certainty feels safe. It feels like solid ground, but Manson argues certainty is one of the biggest blocks to growth there is. Because a person who is certain has already stopped looking for anything that might change their mind. Once you believe you have the correct answer, every new piece of evidence just gets filtered through confirming what you already think instead of actually testing it. The people who improve fastest are the ones who hold their beliefs loosely. Who can say, I used to think this and the evidence has since changed my mind, without treating that as an attack on who they are? Being wrong again and again in public stops being frightening once you stop treating your beliefs as your identity. He frames growth this way, not as collecting more correct answers, but as slowly becoming less wrong than you were the year before. Which explains why so many people, even when they can see a problem clearly, still do not change anything about their lives. Understanding is not the same as acting, and Manson's next idea is about closing exactly that gap. Most people assume change works in this order. Feel motivated first, then take action, then eventually get results. He flips that order completely based partly on his own life. Before his writing found any audience, he built and ran an online dating advice business for years. It struggled. It mostly failed to gain any real traction for a long stretch of that time. What kept him going was not confidence that it would eventually pay off. There was no proof of that yet. What kept him going was a willingness to keep acting anyway, and to let whatever motivation showed up arrive after the action, not before it. He calls this the do something principle. Action is not just the result of motivation. Very often, it is the cause of it. The smallest possible step taken today does more for real change than the most detailed plan sitting untested in your head. Most people wait to feel ready before starting something difficult. His point is that readiness rarely shows up first. It shows up after you have already begun. Badly, imperfectly. Without any guarantee it will work, which leads to one final idea. The one Manson treats as the natural conclusion of everything covered so far. The importance of saying no. Modern life offers an almost endless number of paths. Careers, relationships, identities, beliefs, all available to be tried, swapped, and reconsidered the moment something better seems to appear. And most of the surrounding culture treats that as an unquestioned good. More options, more freedom. Manson argues the opposite, and he is not alone in that argument. He draws on research from the psychologist Barry Schwartz, who studied what happens as the number of available choices grows. Schwartz found that more options do not reliably make people happier. Past a certain point, they produce the opposite. The person choosing between 3 options makes a decision and enjoys it. The person choosing between 30 spends part of their happiness wondering about the ones they did not pick. Total openness does not feel like freedom in practice. It feels like being stuck. Because nothing you choose ever gets deep enough to actually matter, while another option is still sitting there, untested and theoretically better. Real freedom, in Manson's view, comes from commitment, not from keeping every door open. Choosing one relationship and staying with it long enough for it to actually mean something through the parts that are not exciting. Choosing one craft and continuing with it past the point where quitting still felt tempting. Saying no to almost everything else on purpose so that what remains has room to become something real. He extends this into rejection specifically. Being willing to reject things and being willing to be rejected is not a side effect of a meaningful life. It is a requirement of one. A relationship where neither person can ever say no to the other is not intimacy. It is dependency. A life where every possible identity stays open is not freedom. It is a life that never actually commits to becoming anything. Breadth, a little bit of everything, is available to anyone with enough time and money. It is not rare, and it does not run deep. Depth requires giving up the alternatives. It requires rejection, and being rejected, and continuing anyway. This is where the whole argument of the book quietly closes its loop. Not giving a fuck was never about caring less. It was about narrowing what you care about down to a short enough list so those things can finally get the full weight of your attention. And there is one final force, Manson argues, that makes this narrowing not just useful but urgent. The last chapter of this book is about death. He treats it as the most important chapter he wrote. He tells the story of a friend named Josh who died in a car accident when Manson was still a teenager. It was the first time death had become real to him, not as an abstract fact, but as something that could take someone specific at any moment without warning. Manson draws on the work of the anthropologist Ernest Becker. Becker argued that a large part of human behavior, chasing achievement, recognition, legacy, is really a way of managing the fear of dying. People build what Becker called immortality projects, ways of feeling like some part of them will outlast the body. A career built to be remembered, a family name carried forward, a cause attached to something bigger than one lifetime. And most of the anxiety that drives modern life traces back to this fear, whether people notice it or not. because an immortality project can never actually succeed at its real goal, which means it can never fully deliver the peace it was built to produce. The argument he makes is that facing this directly, instead of managing it indirectly through endless achievement, is the most clarifying thing a person can do. Most people live as though their time is unlimited. Important decisions get delayed, difficult conversations get put off. The things that would actually matter, if seriously considered, keep losing out to whatever feels urgent or comfortable in the moment. The awareness that time is specific, limited, and unknown in its exact amount is not something to avoid. It is the tool that cuts through everything else. It is what finally makes the question the whole book has been circling impossible to dodge any longer. What actually deserves your attention in the time you actually have? So this is what the subtle art of not giving a fuck is actually saying, underneath its deliberately blunt title. Chasing happiness directly tends to push it further away, because the chase itself keeps reminding you of what you do not yet have. Suffering was never optional. What is optional is what you choose to suffer for. You are probably not exceptional. Neither is almost anyone else. And that was never the tragedy it feels like. It is permission to stop measuring your life against a standard that was never honest to begin with. You are not to blame for everything that happened to you, but you are the only one who decides what happens next. And you are probably wrong about more than you think. Which is not an insult. It is simply what it means to still be capable of learning. Real change rarely waits for motivation to arrive first. It begins with the smallest possible action, taken before you feel ready, because readiness was never going to show up on its own. A life with too many open doors is not a free life. It is a life that never got deep enough to matter because nothing was ever fully chosen. And underneath all of it sits the fact Manson refuses to let the reader forget. Time is not unlimited, which means the whole point was never to care about less. It was to finally decide, honestly and on purpose, what actually deserves the caring you have. And that is everything from the subtle art of not giving a fuck today on Bookmark. If this is the kind of learning that works for you, hit subscribe so you never miss the next one. And drop a comment below telling us which book you want us to explain next. We read every single one. See you on the next one.